r/ask Reddit. What's a fact you know that almost everyone is wrong about? I see posts in r/popular all the time that misidentify sea lions as seals. It's fairly easy to tell the difference if you see how they move on land. Sea lions can tuck their back flipper under them and walk on it, while seals are tubes and have to bounce/shuffle along on land. There is not just fight or flight response, but also a freeze response. The muscles tense and the body goes very still. This explains why some people are paralyzed with fear and freeze instead of running or fighting back. It is very helpful for camouflage and hiding from predators with poor eyesight. It does not work so well when standing in front of a speeding truck. It's the logic behind the term like a deer in headlights. People don't seem to realize humans do it too. The myth of Narcissus. Most people think of it as he has fallen in love with himself, missing the distinction and nuance that he falls in love with the image of himself. This is important. If you run into any narcissist, you will notice the image they have of themselves is quite different from who they actually are. Also, not everyone who is selfish is a narcissist. Beer won't skunk if you let it get warm after getting cold. It's all about light exposure. Reddit. Thank you to everyone who was able to better refine the statement that I made. It should be noted that extreme and extended changes in temperature will in fact affect the flavor of a beer. Most people say that trees are good against climate change. They think trees will receive all the CO2. But actually we have to thank phytoplankton for making 80% of our oxygen. And for receiving CO2. Trees also are super important in keeping regular rainfall. Think Dust Bowl. Water isn't actually conductive. It's the impurities in the water that allows it to conduct electricity. Edit. For those that are commenting that it can conduct electricity albeit not very well, I'm aware. But it conducts so very poorly that it is essentially negligible. So for simplicity's sake, it's easy enough to say it doesn't conduct electricity. My chemistry teacher told the class this and had some backlash. So, he proved it. Not sure if it's for most people, but the people I've come across had this wrong almost always. Canberra is the capital city of Australia, not Sydney. I just want to add that the outside of the Sydney Opera House is like little tiles and not big metal panels. Your hair and nails don't actually keep growing after you die. Your body just loses moisture and fluids, making your body dehydrate and shrink up. This gives the illusion that your fingernails and hair appear longer. And it's what made people believe in vampires or witches when they'd look at people that had been dead for days and saw their hair and nails grow. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." The first written account of this story is from 1767 and doesn't attribute the quote to her. She would have been 12 at the time and would go on to marry Louis XVI 3 years after this quote was initially published. Picture a hymen. If you're thinking of a sort of sheet or membrane that covers the vagina and is popped by intercourse, you're wrong. It's actually a thin piece of tissue that only partly covers the entrance to your vagina. There are some cases where it does completely cover it. This is known as an imperforate hymen, can cause some not insignificant health issues, and is very rare. It doesn't always hurt when it breaks. It's as likely to be broken by accident long before you have sex as it is to be pristine when you do, and sometimes it just disappears by itself without breaking. Either way, despite the idea that it's some sort of foolproof virginity test, whatever you define virginity as, anyway, it's still a pretty vague concept. It leaves a lot to be desired. Singers, almost universally, have a consistent tendency to sing slightly flat, not sharp. It's due primarily to lack of proper breath support, and not because they have a tin ear for music. That it's a good idea to make furniture out of old pallet wood. No, that stuff gets treated with all kinds of pesticides when shipped overseas, so you don't transfer any bugs or fungi. You don't want the gases emerging from it in your living room. I've even seen baby beds made from that shit. It's also really cheap wood and Splinter City. Edit. Okay, I was wrong. Most pallet wood is not cheap. My bad. Still Splinter City though. But if you just stacking stuff on it, then no need to sand it, I guess. The Mayans didn't disappear or go extinct. They still live in Central America and speak at least 24 different Mayan languages. The last Mayan city didn't fall to Spanish conquest until 1697. Same for Aztecs. Nahuatl is still spoken in Mexico. While serving on an airfield, I remember telling an aviation friend that there was a plane coming in about an hour from then. He said that was impossible because the tower is closed. I explained to him that flights come in all the time when the towers are closed. Even commercial jets are constantly landing without the tower being open. He absolutely blew up, said I didn't know what I was talking about, and that planes would crash all the time if that were the case. How could planes land without a tower? That just makes no sense. I even got my superior officer on the phone the next day to explain it, and he still wouldn't believe it. I had 3 other people under me explain it to him, and he still wouldn't believe it. I told him, dude, it's really simple to prove. The tower hours are posted. Check the last time a flight lands for the night, and I guarantee it will be after that time. He did. It was, and yet he still refused to believe me. The sad fact is, people would probably riot if they found this out, because they'd think it was horribly dangerous, but it's been standard operating procedure for decades now and no one has even noticed. It hasn't caused a single crash. Believe it or not, it's actually safer to come in after hours, because of the reduced traffic. This is not something that needs fixing. It's a very logical move, but I'll bet there are even people reading this that won't believe it. Unless you work in aviation, you probably don't know any of this. Leaning your head back is actually worse for a nosebleed. I get nosebleeds quite frequently, and whenever I feel one coming on I just roll up some tissue and clog it into the nostril that's bleeding. It's almost guaranteed to get rid of it in 5/10 minutes, but that is just me. Dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical. You see the misconception all the time. Someone indulges in their favorite vice and says gotta get my dopamine rush. But dopamine isn't about pleasure, it's about craving. Our dopamine levels don't spike when we get something we want. They spike when something we want becomes available and go down once we actually get the pleasurable thing. Dopamine isn't the rush of driving fast, it's the green light that tells you to go edit. Obligatory thanks for the silver and RIP my inbox. And like some folks have pointed out, I'm oversimplifying for the sake of brevity. Dopamine has a lot of functions, different pathways and receptor sites, etc. But for what I'm talking about, here are some sources: dopamine, rewards, and the brain, with a handy little infographic. Dopamine Jackpot, featuring the inimitable Bob Sapp-Oaksey. Robin Williams didn't kill himself because he was depressed. He killed himself because he had Lewy body dementia, a degenerative brain disease. His autopsy showed that he had one of the worst cases ever seen. His wife has confirmed that he had about 50 symptoms, and depression was one of the least intense. His best friend, who has a name I can't possibly spell, Bobcat Goldthwait, has also confirmed it wasn't depression or substance abuse that caused him to commit suicide. A monsoon isn't rain, it is a seasonal wind. Monsoon winds actually bring droughts at certain times of the year, and rain in other parts. It's a monsoon outside is not a correct thing to say when it's pouring. This is really specific, but in most anatomy or biomechanics textbooks the ankle joint is classified as a second-class lever with the ball of the foot labeled as the fulcrum. This is incorrect as the system rotates about the ankle joint, not the ball of the foot. Therefore it is a first-class lever, not second. This right here is a hill I will die on. Your flight isn't delayed because the tower says so. They blame it on us, air traffic control, because if the airlines admit the blame on themselves they may have to reimburse you. Edit, it's weather 90% of the time. Diamonds can in fact be shattered with a hammer. There is a difference between how strong something is and how hard it is. MSG is a natural substance. If you say you're allergic to MSG, you're allergic to tomatoes and cabbage and all kinds of natural food. MSG is basically if people started calling salt sodium chloride to make it sound like a scary chemical, then started having allergic reactions to it. A heart attack and cardiac arrest are not the same thing. Some severe heart attacks can lead to cardiac arrest, however there are many that experience heart attacks unknowingly and carry on their merry way. Edit, wow this blew up. Thank you so much for the upvotes and thank you kind stranger for the award. After living in Slovakia for 7.5 years, I got beyond frustrated when people would tell me that I would catch a cold from simply being in cold weather, or that air conditioning in the summer makes you sick, or that you treat a cold with antibiotics, or that sitting on cold concrete will give you hemorrhoids. I tried to refute all of this with actual evidence, but it fell upon deaf ears. I loved my time there, but good lord, the old health superstitions are alive and well. That's it folks, you made it to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video.